This season, we've seen some spectacular races. Yeah, most of the time the same person wins, but we've been treated to a lot of fights for the other top 10 spots. After 21 driven races, we're finally coming up to F1's new big thing, the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Big expectations have been set by F1, but what's about to happen no one could have seen coming, and the drivers aren't happy about it. Why don't you stick around to find out why the Las Vegas Grand Prix could become one of the worst Grand Prix we've ever seen due to F1's money and American greed. According to Pirelli, the much-anticipated first Las Vegas Grand Prix will be a jump into the unknown, since unusually chilly temperatures and lengthy straights may potentially distort the tyres. Because of the mid-November day and the plan to stage the charge down the famed strip at night, the air temperatures for all track sessions are expected to be considerably below 10 degrees Celsius. First practice is the earliest, and hence most likely hottest runout. That begins at 2 p.m. local time. The lights for the GP, however, will not go out until 10 p.m. A 2-hour time restriction will bring it to midnight. The 3.85-mile loop in Sin City is characterized by lengthy straights capped in smooth asphalt. Combine this with the lack of high-speed bends and the cold air, we'll have plenty of time to cool the tyres, with few places for drivers to warm them back up. Given the lack of accurate historical comparisons, Pirelli is collaborating with FIA, F1, and Team Data to keep tyre graining and shaking from becoming a distracting sideshow during the weekend. Pirelli Motorsport boss Mario Izzola explains, "We had in Barcelona some pre-season tests with similar temperatures, but Barcelona is a different circuit where you put more energy into the tyre. Also, the asphalt I remember at that time was quite aggressive. It was before the last resurface, so in Las Vegas, I believe we're going to find it quite a unique situation compared to our historical data. Because of the lengthy straights that characterize the lap, there will be extended periods when minimal energy is applied on the tyre's surface. There are no braking zones or lateral forces. The environmental circumstances will be able to reduce the exterior temperature because of this." Previously in Baku, which may be the closest related in terms of track layout, tyres cooled by more than 30 degrees during the final sector. And similar to Azerbaijan, the bulk temperature inside the tyre will be much greater because the Pirellis will be rotating at speeds in excess of 200 miles per hour. The cars will oversteer and/or understeer if the tyres are not suited for the turns. Surface tears and rips will be created when the rubber drags across the top of the abrasive, more road car biased tarmac. The absence of warmth will also lengthen braking zones and increase the likelihood of lockups. Are we able to keep the temperature in the tyres? Izzola says. These factors could generate some graining. The track layout we're working in advance compared to the usual procedure to get simulations in order to understand the severity of the circuit. And it's confirmed that the circuit is high speed, but is a low severity in terms of corners because you don't have, like in Silverstone, high speed corners where you put a lot of energy. The tarmac is not completely a road tarmac, but should be quite low roughness. So tarmac roughness, layout, colder temperatures means that we're not generating a lot of heat into the tyre. That means that you cool down the tyre in a long straight. This heat headache will be exasperated if the field is forced to slow down for a virtual or full safety car. He adds, "The point is that on the straight line, you generate standing waves, ripples in the sidewall as the tyre deform. So we need to protect the tyre from this high speed and the standing wave." Pirelli has requested transparency from the FIA, the championship and competitors in preparation. When teams finished their simulations, they sent data to the tyre provider. Pirelli then communicated this with the other parties as appropriate. Given the enormous expectations around the Las Vegas Grand Prix, no one wants to see a shambles emerge. Pirelli has also submitted 3 of the event's softest compounds, the C3, C4 and C5. While the fact that there are only 6 different types of rubber to cover a complete calendar, which will expand to 24 different circuits next season, the stickiest and most flexible rubber should aid teams in their efforts to maintain some heat in the tyres. High pressures will be required as well. This will stiffen the sidewalls, making them less susceptible to the tyre shaking feeling caused by standing waves. But the tyre problems is not the only worry for the drivers, as the low temperatures forecast when the cars come to the circuit will present more tests to Formula 1 teams. While F1 cars are tested and filmed in Europe over the cold winter months, the difference in Vegas is that it is a competitive event, which means that there can be no concessions in terms of power unit consumption and so on, and the car spec is fixed from the start of qualifying onwards. The strip's ultra-long main straight will bring its own set of obstacles. It, like Baku, will ensure that brakes and tyres are possibly colder than optimal when cars approach the last corner. To add to the excitement, like with any street circuit, there is only so much information that teams have been able to integrate into their own simulations, in terms of bumps and so on, and the actual nature of the newly laid surface remains unknown. And this information is highly needed to make sure the tyres operate in the right window. And we all know that tyre management has been one of the keys to the 2023 season, with enormous disparities between the teams who get it right for the race, notably Red Bull and Aston Martin, and others that get it wrong, like as Mercedes, as recently as the Brazilian GP. Teams typically have a small operating window in which they can get their tyres to perform, and hitting that sweet spot in Vegas, with mechanical setup and outlap preparation among the factors, may be difficult. It would be a significant difficulty to start them following safety car periods. In terms of the tyres, it really is taking them into a different environment, isn't it? Red Bull chief engineer Paul Monahan comments. A few years ago, we went to the Nürburgring in October, and it was wet and cold every day. And Austin, a few years ago, I remember one day was particularly freezing cold. We get into all the concerns of cold cracking, handling the tyres, all this type of thing. And yes, they are very much at the lower end of their operating range. So within the sort of freedoms that we have with the wheel bodywork, as we now call it, and trying to operate the car, it's up to us to try and get the tyres to a point where they work. And the challenge is there for all of us. I think that's across the three compounds. They're all going to be too cold. It's really a case of, can we get all of them into the window for long enough that we run a decent race stint? As Monahan notes, there is a link between tyres and aero specifications in terms of what he refers to as the wheel bodywork, brake ducts and other things in that region, but the circumstances will certainly have a significant influence on other aspects of the car. Most teams carried extra louvers and/or opened the Coke bottle in the back to help cooling in Qatar and/or Mexico, but none of that will be necessary in Vegas. You'd think that would push teams to work on reduced drag for faster straight-line speed, but it's not always that simple. But Monahan thinks that teams should be able to adapt to changing conditions. I'm not too worried about sorting the car cooling out, to be honest, he said. I don't think it'll be that bad. We ran our first promotional day back in February this year, and I was sitting there shivering at Silverstone, wishing I wasn't there, and we could make it run. We'll see some more closed-up cars. Maybe some people will alter the cooling exits towards the back of the top body, which will shrink it down a little bit. It's a case of not wanting to stall all the radiators because they've got so much back pressure on them, they don't work. But that's our problem. Teams must deal with a complicated link between cooling and downforce levels. I think what you would see typically, and it's sort of a broad brush summary, if we open the car, we lose a little bit of downforce, Monahan said. So the more closed we are, the better it is for our downforce. So typically, the drag is more tyre and rear wing than it is necessarily the cooling arrangements. If we can put a bit of load on the car, closing it up, we will. But we're sort of coming to the end of the season, so it's not going to be a sort of whole new top body or something that we choose to do. We'll try and do it from the options we have. That's an intriguing admission from Monahan. As teams start reaching the cost cap, creating and producing new parts for a single race becomes a luxury, and not only for the major players. The interesting thing is what we do now that we live in this cost cap world, Williams head of car performance Dave Robertson said. Previously, we'd probably made a new, smaller cooling package and traded in the cooling we didn't need for downforce, and we'd probably done a few other things on the car. But now we've got to say, well, is it worth doing that? Particularly as you get towards the end of the season. That may depend on how much attrition and expense you've had to spend on that in the previous months. I think it's quite a good example of how in a cost cap world do you choose to optimize a package for that particular circuit. Because the parts you could make, you probably won't use anywhere else. Do you want to do it or not? And in part that depends on what you think the other guys will do. So the whole thing becomes quite a nice little game theory problem. What are your thoughts on the brand new Las Vegas Grand Prix? Are you excited to see the cars fly down the strip? And do you think they'll suffer from the colder temperatures and other problems on this new track? Let us know in the comments below.